Nvidia just invested $100 billion into OpenAI. Most of this money is going to find its way back to Nvidia when OpenAI buys Nvidia chips or leases Nvidia chips. However, today, Nvidia is going to be receiving non-voting shares of OpenAI in exchange for that investment. This effectively marries Nvidia to OpenAI and secures a future partnership. If Nvidia was expecting organic chip sales, why did they need this insurance policy? So when we see Nvidia basically hand out these bags of cash to its customer with the expectation that these same customers are going to come back to Nvidia and buy their chips from them, this smells like circular investment. And that's kind of because it is. And a lot of people are viewing this circular investment as a smoke signal that there is a bubble brewing. And I can't really blame them. Now, you have to understand that for every dollar that gets invested in the AI space in general, a big portion of that eventually finds its way to the one company that is making the best AI chips in the US right now, Nvidia. You see, in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, people grossly exaggerated how quickly the internet was going to take off. So people laid down millions and millions of miles of fiber optic cables in preparation for an internet boom that never arrived, or rather didn't arrive as quickly as they thought it would arrive. So the vast majority of those fiber optic cables remained unused. Nvidia also more recently has invested $2 billion in XAI to, you guessed it, get them to buy their chips to use in the data centers that XAI is setting up. But it's not just customers that Nvidia is getting chummy with. Nvidia is also getting into bed with one of its biggest competitors, Intel, because they just invested $5 billion for a 4 to 5% stake in Intel stock. These are really interesting times when enemies are making for excellent bedfellows. Now, this deal doesn't have the same ring to it as a circular investment, because the last thing Intel is going to be doing is using that money to buy chips from Nvidia. However, what Nvidia is expecting to do with Intel here is, through this partnership, set up chip fabrication labs to build their chips that are of the very same kind that they have going on overseas in Taiwan with TSMC. And that is where our investigation is going to have to go, overseas, in order to understand this erratic, almost panicky behavior on behalf of Nvidia. We're going to have to take our investigation overseas to a little 5-letter word country that every tech company in the US is afraid to pronounce and is afraid of: China. China's had a fantastic year in terms of AI. At the start of this year, they unleashed DeepSeek R1 onto the world, a model that was trained for a measly $8 million, so they claimed, but a model which beat the performances of other US-based top-tier models that were trained for significantly much more money. And this sent out shockwaves of panic across the tech scene within the US, with Google issuing a code red memo internally urging its employees to get their acts together so that they can continue to be competitive in the face of this new threat. And the US responded by restricting their best chips from entering the Chinese market, aka Nvidia was no longer allowed to sell the top-of-the-line H20 chips to China, which Nvidia obviously wasn't happy about. But they say necessity is the mother of invention, and China more than stepped up to the challenge. The major tech corporations in China, Alibaba, Huawei, Tencent, and Baidu, they all took this very personally. And they were able to come up with their own version of homegrown AI chips that matched the performance of Nvidia's H20 line of chips, and in a lot of cases, they were able to match this performance much more efficiently, aka for much cheaper. And the Chinese state is also investing heavily in setting up chip fabrication labs, so there's definitely a lot of support from the Chinese government for these private tech corporations in China to help with their efforts of coming up with these state-of-the-art AI chips. So in order for Nvidia to survive this existentially, it needs US tech companies to train their AI models on Nvidia chips. Because when it comes to AI chips, the vendor lock-in is absolutely real. And an example of this vendor lock-in is the fact that you need specialized software to work with these GPUs and to accelerate hardware on these GPUs. And NVIDIA's version of that software is the CUDA library. And research labs and companies that have been using the CUDA library will not switch to anything else because they have trained all of their staff in using this particular library. NVIDIA also realizes that in order to survive and come out on top, it needs to control the entire stack. So as part of its partnership with Intel, it's also making custom-built CPUs that can work very closely with Nvidia GPUs to deliver great AI performance even when you're using CPUs. And Nvidia may be cornered right now, but they have by no means lost the fight, because the best AI chips for advanced AI workloads, aka the H100 and the H200 chips, are still best in business, and they handle large AI workloads like no other chips on the face of the planet. But I guarantee you, Jensen Huang is waking up sweating in the middle of the night most nights because he hears the tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock of competition catching up to him, and the clock that is ticking is very squarely in Beijing time zone. So in summary, there absolutely is a fire under Nvidia's ass, and Nvidia is very right to dance as this fire demands it do so, because this is a game where the winner takes everything and the loser isn't even left with scraps. Thank you for watching.